You have been lied to about what rich people look like. Not by accident, deliberately. The person driving the brand new Mercedes with the designer watch and the flashy Instagram statistically has a net worth under $100,000. And the person parking a 10-year-old Ford F-150 in the driveway of a modest house in a quiet neighborhood might be worth $10 million. That is not a theory. That is what the data actually shows. 61% of American households earning over $250,000 annually do not drive luxury vehicles. They drive Toyotas, Hondas, Fords. The single most popular vehicle among Americans earning over $200,000 annually is the Ford F-150 pickup truck. And here is where it gets even stranger. The IRS analyzed estate data for Americans who died with assets valued at $3.5 million or more. The median value of their primary residence was $469,000, less than 10% of their total net worth. These were multimillionaires living in houses that looked completely ordinary from the outside. So the question is, why? Why would someone worth tens of millions of dollars deliberately choose to look like everyone else? The answer involves Machiavelli, a billionaire who secretly gave away $7.5 billion over 2 decades, and nobody knew. Not his business partners, not his friends, not the public, until a corporate deal accidentally exposed everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, the way you see wealth and the way you build it will never be the same. Let's start with the most uncomfortable truth in personal finance. Most people who look rich are not rich, and most people who are rich do not look rich. The Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances confirms this in black and white. The typical household that drives luxury vehicles, leases foreign brands, and maintains a highly visible consumer lifestyle carries a net worth that is often under $100,000 relative to their income. Meanwhile, the typical millionaire next door maintains a median net worth of $1.6 million and an average net worth of $3.7 million, accumulated through one consistent behavioral pattern: spending dramatically less than they earn. The typical genuinely wealthy household keeps its annual realized taxable income at less than 7% of total net worth. Think about what that means. Someone worth $10 million might show up on paper as earning $700,000 a year. Their neighbor, earning the same $700,000 but spending it all, leasing the BMW, wearing the watch, updating the kitchen, shows up to the world as equally successful, but their balance sheets are universes apart. This is not accidental. It is a system, and it has a name. Behavioral economists call it counter-signaling. When luxury goods become accessible through credit and replica markets, when anyone can lease a Mercedes on a moderate salary, the informational value of visible luxury collapses. Genuinely wealthy people respond by going in the opposite direction entirely: unbranded, understated, invisible. And here is where it gets philosophically deep. 500 years ago, a political philosopher wrote the exact rulebook the ultra-wealthy are following today, and nobody talks about it. In 1513, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince. Most people think it is a book about political power. It's actually the oldest manual for stealth wealth ever written. Machiavelli observed something that the wealthiest Americans have quietly internalized for generations. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few feel what you are, and those few will not dare to oppose themselves to the many." In modern terms, what you display publicly is a target, what you conceal is protected. Machiavelli also described what he called the fox and lion dynamic. The lion is powerful but blind to traps. The fox is cunning and avoids them entirely. He argued that true power requires being the fox, not the lion. Now, apply that to wealth in 2025. The person who visibly displays their net worth, the lion, becomes an immediate target for predatory litigation, for regulatory scrutiny, for social resentment, for family pressure, for anyone looking for a deep pocket to sue. The person who practices financial understatement, the fox, moves through the world without triggering any of those threats. Their capital compounds quietly, their identity remains protected, and their legal exposure stays minimal. This is not paranoia. It is strategy, and three of the most successful wealth creators in American history built their entire financial lives around it. One of them secretly gave away $7.5 billion over 2 decades, and nobody knew. Not his business partners, not his friends, not the public, until a corporate deal accidentally exposed everything. Warren Buffett has a net worth exceeding $100 billion. He still lives in the same house he bought in Omaha, Nebraska in 1958 for $31,500. 5 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a neighborhood that looks completely ordinary from the street. He drives a moderately priced domestic car and only upgrades when family members tell him the old one is embarrassing. His diet runs on McDonald's breakfast items and Coca-Cola, not because he cannot afford anything else, because every dollar not spent on a depreciating consumer good is a dollar compounding inside a business that generates more dollars. But Buffett is well known. The second example is someone most people have never heard of, and that invisibility was entirely intentional. Chuck Feeney co-founded Duty Free Shoppers, the global duty-free retail empire. By the early 1980s, he was worth approximately $7.5 billion. He lived in rented apartments, owned no home, owned no car, flew economy class, wore a $15 Casio watch. In 1984, while still actively running the business, Feeney secretly transferred his entire 38.75% ownership stake in duty-free shoppers to his private foundation, the Atlantic Philanthropics. He then spent the next 2 decades distributing that entire fortune anonymously. Universities received tens of millions. Research centers received major grants. Every single recipient was required to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. His closest business partners had no idea. The public had no idea. His giving was so thoroughly concealed that it only became known when a corporate acquisition in the late 1990s forced legal disclosure. He gave away $7.5 billion in secret over 20 years. Then there is Bill Gates, net worth exceeding $100 billion. And while Gates owns visible personal assets, the third example is about what he does with his serious long-term capital. Through his private investment office, Cascade Investment LLC, which has been managed by a relatively unknown figure named Michael Larson since 1994, Gates has become the single largest private individual owner of farmland in the United States. Over 242,000 acres across 17 states, more than $690 million in agricultural land acquisitions. Here's the part that reveals the strategy. These purchases were made not in Bill Gates's name. They were executed through nested layers of corporate entities, companies named Angelina Ag Company, Lakeland Sands LLC, and similar structures that carry no public connection to their ultimate owner. County tax assessors, public databases, local records, none of them point to Gates. The fox, not the lion. But hiding the asset is only half the strategy. The other half is what the truly wealthy do with those assets once they own them. And this is the part that almost nobody outside of family offices ever sees. Underneath the modest houses and the F-150s and the $15 Casio watches, there is a financial architecture that is genuinely sophisticated, and it's built around one central principle: never sell, never trigger a taxable event, never let the government see the gain. The strategy has a name on Wall Street: buy, borrow, die. Here's how it works in practice. The wealthy buy appreciating low visibility assets: private business equity, farmland, timberland, art. These assets grow in value over time, but as long as you do not sell them, there is no capital gains tax. The gain is real, it's just invisible to the IRS until a sale occurs. Instead of selling, they borrow. A collector with $10 million in unbranded art doesn't sell the collection to fund their lifestyle. They use it as collateral for a non-amortizing, interest-only loan. The lender files a legal document, the art stays on the wall, the cash arrives tax-free. No sale, no taxable event, no auction house commission. Similarly, wealthy families fund private placement life insurance policies, a $40 billion tax shelter used by fewer than 3,000 Americans. The average face value at the leading provider is $38 million. Under IRC Section 72, investments inside these policies compound completely tax-free. The policyholder then borrows against the accumulated cash value at favorable rates, tax-free liquidity, no gain realized. When the wealth creator eventually dies, the assets pass to heirs with what is called a step-up in basis, which legally erases the entire built-up capital gain. A farmland portfolio worth $50 million that cost $5 million decades ago transfers to heirs with a new cost basis of $50 million. The $45 million gain disappears permanently, tax-free. That's the architecture: buy, borrow, die. 3 steps, entire generations of capital preserved. But there is a darker side to some of these strategies, because not every tool the wealthy use is safe, and some are now being aggressively shut down by the IRS and Congress. PPLI sounds bulletproof. It is not. If the underlying investments underperform, hedge funds having bad years, private equity taking losses, the cash value inside the policy can fall below the level needed to cover ongoing insurance charges. The policy lapses, and if a premium finance loan is outstanding when that happens, the entire loan balance above the original cost basis is immediately taxed as ordinary income. The entire tax shelter unwinds in a single catastrophic event. In 2015, the U.S. Tax Court ruled in Weber versus Commissioner that an investor had violated the investor control doctrine. The IRS introduced 70,000 emails as evidence that the investor was directing investment decisions through intermediaries. Years of accumulated tax-free gains were clawed back. The strategy that was supposed to eliminate taxes created a massive tax liability instead. Then there are syndicated conservation easements, for decades promoted as a sophisticated tax strategy where investors purchased undeveloped land, obtained inflated appraisals, and donated development rights to land trusts in exchange for massive charitable deductions. The IRS reviewed 798 tax court cases involving these structures. They took a zero valuation position 93% of the time, imposed penalties 99% of the time. In January 2026, the IRS announced a final settlement program requiring substantial disallowance of all claimed deductions, and federal courts handed down prison sentences of 23 and 25 years for prominent promoters for wire fraud and money laundering. And litigation finance, the $17.2 billion global asset class, where sophisticated investors fund lawsuits for 15 to 30% IRR returns, is now facing an existential regulatory threat. On June 16, 2025, the Senate Finance Committee released draft legislation proposing a 40.8% excise tax on litigation proceeds, no grandfathering for existing agreements, effective immediately upon passage. The lesson is consistent across all three. The same invisibility that makes these strategies powerful makes them vulnerable. When the IRS finally looks, it looks hard. Let's bring this together. The wealthiest Americans do not look wealthy. Not by accident, by design. 61% of high earners drive Toyotas and Fords. Their median home is worth $469,000. Their taxable income is less than 7% of their net worth. They learned from Machiavelli, visible wealth is a target. Concealed wealth compounds quietly. Chuck Feeney gave away $7.5 billion in complete secrecy. Bill Gates buys farmland through shell companies with names that give nothing away. Warren Buffett still lives in a house he bought for $31,500. And underneath all of it, a financial architecture built on one rule: never sell, borrow instead. Let the step up in basis erase the gain at death. PPLI, art-secured lending, farmland held through nested corporate structures. Buy, borrow, die. But the same opacity that protects these strategies is now attracting the most aggressive IRS enforcement in a generation. Prison sentences for promoters, zero valuation positions on shelters, proposed excise taxes on litigation returns. The game has not changed. The rules are shifting. Here is what this video did not cover. We showed you how the wealthy hide their assets and avoid triggering taxable events across generations. But there is a parallel question that's equally important and almost never discussed. How do they find each other? Because the Ford F-150 and the $469,000 house and the unbranded Loro Piana jacket, those are not just financial strategies. They're signals. Signals designed to be invisible to the general public, but immediately readable to other members of the same financial class. There is an entire language of stealth wealth, and once you know how to read it, you start seeing it everywhere. That's exactly what the next video breaks down.